I have heard parents say cruel things in my courtroom. I have heard mothers blame teachers, fathers blame judges, and grown adults blame children for problems they created themselves. But in all my years on the bench, I had never seen a woman laugh at parenting advice so confidently, only to have her own children expose her in front of the entire court. Her name was Karen Whitmore, and the moment she entered my courtroom, I knew she had not come there to listen. She came to perform. She wore a cream designer blazer, polished earrings, expensive heels, and a PTA badge clipped to her handbag like it was proof of moral superiority. Her hair was perfect. Her smile was controlled. Her posture told the room one thing before she ever opened her mouth. I am important. Across from her stood Emily Dawson, a fourth-grade teacher who looked like she had not slept properly in weeks. She had a thin folder in her hands, but the way she held it told me it carried more than school reports. It carried exhaustion. It carried fear. And sitting near the side wall were Karen's two children, 14-year-old Lily Whitmore and 11-year-old Mason Whitmore. That was what caught my attention first. Not Karen's attitude, not Emily's nervousness. The children, Lily sat stiffly, hands folded so tightly her knuckles had turned pale. Mason kept his eyes on the floor, one sneaker tapping softly against the bench. Neither child looked at their mother. People watching at home may not understand how much that matters. Children in court usually look toward a parent for comfort, even when that parent is angry. They search for safety. They search for permission to breathe. Karen's children did not search for her. They avoided her. That was the first crack in the story Karen wanted me to believe. The case looked simple on paper. Karen claimed Emily Dawson had humiliated her son at school, targeted her daughter unfairly, and used personal bias to damage Karen's reputation within the PTA. She wanted compensation, a written apology, and a formal statement clearing her family's name, but Emily had filed a counterclaim, harassment, false accusations, threatening emails, public humiliation at school meetings, and something about Karen pressuring her children to lie. That last part made me pause, because when children become weapons in an adult's conflict, the courtroom changes. It stops being about pride. It becomes about damage. I asked Karen to begin. She rose before I finished speaking, as if she had been waiting for her stage light. She smiled toward the gallery and said, "Your Honor, I am a mother. I know my children better than any teacher, counselor, or school employee ever could." Then she looked directly at me. "And with all due respect, I don't need parenting advice from a judge." The courtroom went silent, not because the words were clever, because they were reckless. I have been insulted many times. That does not disturb me. The robe teaches you patience. But what disturbed me was the way Karen glanced at her children after saying it. She wanted them to see it. She wanted them to see authority mocked. She wanted them to believe that rules only mattered when their mother approved of them. I looked at her calmly and said, "Mom, this court is not here to replace a parent. It is here to examine evidence." Karen laughed, a soft laugh, cold, controlled. Practiced. She said, "Evidence? My kids will tell you exactly what happened." That was when Lily's face changed, only slightly. But I saw it. Her eyes dropped. Her shoulders tightened. Mason stopped tapping his shoe. In that moment, I knew something was wrong. Karen had not brought her children because they were safe telling the truth. She had brought them because she believed they were too afraid not to support her. Then Emily Dawson opened her folder and said, "Your Honor, before the children speak, I need the court to understand what they told the school counselor." Karen's smile vanished. For the first time that morning, she turned sharply toward Emily, and I saw fear hiding behind all that confidence. Karen Whitmore had built her entire courtroom presence on control. Control of her voice, control of her image, control of her children. But the moment Emily Dawson mentioned the school counselor, that control slipped. Only for a second. Most people in the gallery missed it, but I did not. Judges learn to watch the smallest changes because people often reveal the truth in moments they think no one is studying them. Karen's jaw tightened. Her right hand gripped the edge of the table. Her eyes moved quickly toward Lily and Mason, not with concern, with warning. That bothered me. I asked Emily, "What did the children tell the counselor?" Emily took a breath before answering, not because she was unsure, but because she understood the weight of what she was about to say. She said, "They said they were scared to tell the truth at home." The courtroom went still. Karen immediately laughed. That laugh was meant to dismiss the statement before anyone could feel it. Manipulative people do that often. They laugh before the pain can land. They turn seriousness into drama, hoping the room will follow them instead of the facts. But no one followed Karen. I looked at Lily. Her eyes were fixed on her hands. I looked at Mason. He looked smaller than an 11-year-old should look inside a courtroom. Karen said, "That is completely ridiculous. My children adore me." The word adore sounded rehearsed. Patrons who are secure do not usually need to announce devotion like evidence. Emily handed over the counselor's notes. I read them carefully. There were no dramatic phrases, no exaggerated accusations. Just simple observations written by a school professional who had clearly been careful with every word. Lily reported feeling pressured to say Miss Dawson was unfair. Mason reported that his mother told him families protect each other, even if teachers ask questions. And then there was one sentence that made me pause. Mason said he was afraid his mother would stop speaking to him if he told the truth. I looked up from the paper. Karen was staring at me now, her face tight with anger. I said, "Mrs. Whitmore, did you tell your children they had to protect the family?" She smiled again, but it was weaker this time. "I taught them loyalty," she said. There it was. Loyalty, a word people sometimes use when they really mean silence. I have seen that word used in abusive marriages, business fraud, family disputes, and criminal trials. Loyalty can be beautiful when it protects love, but when it protects lies, it becomes a cage. Emily then explained the incident that started everything. Mason had pushed another student during recess. The student fell and hit his head on the edge of a bench. The injury was not life-threatening, but it was serious enough to require stitches. Emily reported it according to school policy. Karen arrived furious, not at Mason's behavior, not at the injured child's family, but at Emily. According to Emily, Karen said, "My son does not get written up. Fix it." Karen denied saying that, but again, she denied it too quickly. Then Emily described Lily's situation. Lily had submitted an essay that included several paragraphs copied from another student. When Emily addressed it privately, Lily cried and apologized. Karen, however, accused Emily of humiliating her daughter and launched a PTA campaign claiming the teacher was emotionally abusive. That was when I looked back at Lily. A tear had slipped down her cheek. Karen did not notice. Or worse, she noticed and chose not to care. I asked Karen, "Did your daughter apologize for the essay?" Karen said, "She was manipulated into apologizing." Lily's lips parted slightly. For the first time, I saw the child fighting with herself. The courtroom felt it too. Even the spectators stopped shifting in their seats. Everyone could sense that Lily was holding something back. And then Karen made the mistake that changed the direction of the entire case. She turned toward her daughter and said, "Tell them, Lily. Tell the judge how Miss Dawson forced you." Lily looked at her mother, then she looked at me, and the silence that followed was not empty. It was a child deciding whether truth was finally safer than fear. I have questioned adults who were terrified of prison. I have questioned business owners who were terrified of losing money. But there is a different kind of fear in a child who is terrified of disappointing a parent. Lily Whitmore sat in my courtroom with that fear written across her face. Her mother had just commanded her to speak, and everyone in the room understood what was happening. Karen was not asking for truth. She was demanding performance. I leaned forward slightly and kept my voice calm. "Lily," I said, "you are not here to protect anyone's pride. You are here to tell the truth." Karen immediately interrupted. She knows that. I looked at Karen. "One more interruption, and you will sit silently until I decide otherwise." That stopped her. For the first time, Karen Whitmore had to close her mouth while someone else held the room. Lily swallowed hard. Her eyes moved toward Emily Dawson, then toward her brother, then back to me, and then she whispered, "Miss Dawson didn't force me." The courtroom did not move. Karen's face turned pale. I asked gently, "What happened?" Lily's voice shook. "I copied parts of the essay. Miss Dawson talked to me after class. She wasn't mean. She said I could redo it for partial credit." Emily lowered her eyes, not in victory. In sadness, because good teachers do not enjoy seeing a child trapped between honesty and home, Karen snapped, "Lily, stop." The bailiff stepped forward before I even had to speak. That is when I saw Mason begin to cry, quietly, silently, trying to hide it with the sleeve of his sweatshirt. And believe me, that image stays with the judge, not because children cry in court. They do. But because Mason was not crying from confusion. He was crying because his sister had just done something brave, and he knew what it might cost them later. I asked Mason if he wanted to speak. Karen said, "He's too young." I replied, "He is old enough to be used in your claim. He is old enough to be heard." That sentence hit harder than I expected. The gallery went still again. Mason looked up at me. His small voice barely carried across the room. Mom said if we didn't say Miss Dawson was lying, she would pull us out of school. Karen shook her head. That is not true. But Mason kept going. She said everyone would think we were bad kids. She said Miss Dawson wanted to ruin our family. Now the case had changed completely. This was no longer a parent defending her children from a teacher. This was a parent using her children to protect her own image. I have seen that pattern many times. A controlling adult creates a crisis, then forces children to become witnesses for a version of reality they did not choose. And if those children resist, the adult calls it betrayal. Lily began crying now too. She said, "Mom told me to say Miss Dawson screamed at me." But she didn't. Karen stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "You're embarrassing me," she said. "Not, are you okay?" Not, "Why are you scared?" Not, "Tell the truth." "You're embarrassing me." That was the sentence the entire courtroom heard. And sometimes one sentence reveals a person more clearly than 100 documents. I looked at Karen and saw what the case had truly become. She did not see her children as people in that moment. She saw them as extensions of her reputation. And when they stopped protecting that reputation, she treated them like enemies. Emily Dawson then opened another section of her folder. She said, "Your Honor, there are recordings from the PTA meeting." Karen turned toward her sharply. "No," she said, just one word, but it carried panic. Emily looked at me and continued, "Karen told parents I was dangerous around children. She said she had proof. She told them Lily and Mason were witnesses. Karen's hands were shaking now. The polished PTA mother was disappearing. I allowed the recording. The screen lit up. And before the first voice played through the speakers, Lily reached for Mason's hand. That small gesture told me the next piece of evidence was going to hurt. The PTA recording began with ordinary noise. Chairs moving. Parents whispering. Someone coughing near the microphone. The kind of sounds you hear in school meetings across America every week. Then Karen Whitmore's voice came through the speakers, calm, polished, generously confident. She said, "As parents, we have a responsibility to protect our children from adults who abuse authority." I watched Emily Dawson lower her eyes. I watched Lily tighten her grip around Mason's hand. And I watched Karen stare straight ahead, pretending the voice in that recording belonged to someone else. That is a strange thing about evidence. It removes performance. A person can dress carefully, speak elegantly, and build a whole identity around respectability. But when their own words return to the room, there is nowhere left to hide. Karen's recorded voice continued. "My children have been targeted by Miss Dawson. They are afraid of her, and I believe other families should be afraid too." The gallery reacted quietly. A few people shook their heads. Someone whispered, "That's awful." But I kept my eyes on Lily and Mason because the most damaging part was not what Karen said about the teacher. It was what she had forced her children to carry. Lily had been made into proof. Mason had been made into a weapon. And neither of them had agreed to that. The recording continued. A parent in the meeting asked, "Did the school investigate this?" Karen answered, "They are protecting their own. That is why parents need to stand together." That sentence was clever, very clever. Manipulative people often know how to take private anger and dress it up as public concern. They do not say, "I want revenge." They say, "I want accountability." They do not say, "I was embarrassed." They say, "I am protecting the children." And sometimes people believe them. Emily handed over emails next. One by one, they showed Karen pressuring other parents to complain about Miss Dawson. She used words like unsafe, unstable, aggressive, unfit, heavy words, career-damaging words, words that can follow a teacher for years. I asked Karen if she had evidence supporting those claims. She said, "My children told me." Lily shook her head. It was small, almost invisible. But the room saw it. I asked Lily, "Did you tell your mother Miss Dawson was unsafe?" Lily whispered, "No." Karen snapped, "You were upset." Lily looked at her mother with tears running down her face and said, "I was upset because you kept telling everyone. That broke something open." Mason began crying harder. Emily Dawson covered her mouth. Even Karen seemed stunned, not by her daughter's pain, but by the fact that Lily had said it out loud. That difference matters. A loving parent hears pain and moves toward the child. A controlling parent hears exposure and moves toward defense. Karen chose defense. She said, "Children exaggerate." I leaned back in my chair and studied her. There it was again. When her children supported her, they were credible. When they told the truth against her, they were exaggerating. That is not parenting. That is ownership. Then Emily's attorney produced the final set of documents for that phase of the case. Screenshots from a private PTA chat. Karen had written, "If Dawson isn't removed, I'll make sure no parent feels safe sending their child to her class." Another message read, "My kids know what to say." The courtroom froze. Karen's face drained of color. That message did not sound like a concerned mother. It sounded like a plan. I looked at her and asked, "What did you mean by that?" For the first time all morning, Karen had no immediate answer. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. She looked at Lily, then Mason, then Emily, and finally back at me. That silence told me she was calculating, not regretting, calculating. But before she could form another explanation, Mason lifted his head and said something that made every adult in the room go still. Mom practiced with us in the car. Karen turned toward him so fast her chair shifted. "Mason," she warned. But the warning came too late, because once a child finds the courage to speak the first truth, the next truth often follows. Mason looked at me through tears and said, "She told us what to say before we came here." And then Lily added, almost in a whisper, "She made us rehearse it last night." There are moments in a courtroom when the truth does not arrive like evidence. It arrives like a child's trembling voice. "She made us rehearse it last night." Those words stayed suspended in the air. Karen Whitmore did not move at first. She stared at Lily as if her own daughter had betrayed a sacred contract. But what Karen called betrayal, I recognized as liberation. Because children do not expose a parent in court for attention. They do it when the fear of lying becomes heavier than the fear of punishment. I asked Lily, "What did your mother make you rehearse?" Karen stood up immediately. I object. I looked at her and said, "You are not an attorney, Mrs. Whitmore. Sit down." She remained standing for 1 second too long. The bailiff shifted beside the wall. Then Karen sat, but her eyes never left Lily. Lily wiped her face with both hands. Her voice broke as she said, "She told me to say Miss Dawson called me stupid. She told Mason to say Miss Dawson grabbed his arm." The courtroom reacted all at once. Emily Dawson's face went white. Mason shook his head quickly and cried, "She didn't grab me. She never did." That was the moment the entire case detonated, because an accusation like that is not small. You do not falsely accuse a teacher of putting hands on a child and then call it parenting. You do not place a professional woman's career, reputation, and livelihood under a lie because your pride was wounded. I looked at Karen, and for the first time, even I struggled to stay composed. She had walked into my courtroom mocking parenting advice. But the evidence now showed she had taught her children something far darker than disrespect. She had taught them how to lie with consequences attached to someone else's life. Emily's attorney then asked if the court would allow one final recording. Karen whispered, "Please don't." That whisper changed the room, not because it sounded sorry, because it sounded afraid. The recording came from Lily's phone. She had recorded it the night before court, apparently without her mother knowing. The audio was shaky, but clear enough Karen's voice filled the courtroom. "You will both say exactly what we practiced. Lily, you say Miss Dawson embarrassed you and called you worthless. Mason, you say she touched your arm hard enough to scare you." Then Mason's small voice appeared in the recording, but she didn't. Karen answered, "It does not matter. She started this when she embarrassed our family." The gallery gasped. Emily Dawson lowered her head and began to cry. But the recording continued. Lily's voice asked, "What if the judge asks us?" Karen replied, "Then you look sad and say you don't want to talk about it. Judges eat that up." I remember looking down at my bench for half a second. Not because I was shaken by the insult, because I was shaken by the strategy. Karen had planned to use her children's fear as theater. She had planned to turn their tears into weapons. She had planned to destroy a teacher with a story she knew was false. Then the final line played. "If either of you makes me look bad tomorrow, you will regret it." And then silence, real silence, the kind that makes every person in the room understand they have witnessed something they cannot unhear. Karen suddenly turned toward Lily and shouted, "How could you record your own mother?" Lily flinched. Mason grabbed her hand. Emily Dawson stood frozen, and the courtroom saw everything, not just the lie, the household behind the lie. I struck the bench once. "Mrs. Whitmore, enough." But Karen was no longer listening. Her mask had fallen completely. She pointed at Lily and said, "After everything I do for you, this is what you do to me." That sentence told the world who Karen truly was. not a concerned parent, not a PTA advocate, not a mother protecting her children. A woman who believed her children existed to protect her image. I ordered the bailiff to move Karen away from the children. She resisted at first, insisting she had a right to speak to them. But I told her clearly, at this moment, your children need protection from your pressure, not more of it. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Karen turned toward me, eyes wet with rage. You have no right to judge my parenting, she said. I looked at Lily and Mason, two children who just risked everything to tell the truth. Then I looked back at Karen, and I said, Mom, you brought your parenting into this courtroom yourself. Her face collapsed because for the first time, she understood the truth was no longer under her control. I have delivered many rulings from the bench, but some decisions carry more than legal weight. Some decisions become a message. Not just to the people standing in front of me, but to every parent watching who believes love gives them permission to control, threaten, or manipulate a child into silence. Karen Whitmore sat at the table with her face turned away from the courtroom. Her perfect posture was gone. Her PTA badge still hung from her handbag, but now it looked less like authority and more like a costume from a role she had been playing too long. Emily Dawson stood across from her, shaken but steady. That mattered to me. She had entered my courtroom accused of cruelty, bias, and misconduct. She had sat there while her name was dragged through gossip, while her career was nearly destroyed, while two frightened children carried a lie they never wanted to carry. And yet she did not look victorious. She looked heartbroken. That is how I knew she had been telling the truth. People who enjoy destruction often smile when their enemy falls. Emily Dawson did not smile. She looked at Lily and Mason like a teacher who understood exactly how much courage it had taken for them to speak. I dismissed Karen's claim in full. Then I ruled in favor of Emily Dawson's counterclaim for harassment, reputational harm, and court costs. I ordered the evidence forwarded to the school district and appropriate authorities for further review, especially the recording where Karen instructed her children to make false accusations. But the money was not the most important part of that ruling. The record was, the official record now said Emily Dawson had not abused those children. The official record now said Lily and Mason had told the truth. And sometimes that is the first step toward healing. I looked at Karen and said, Mrs. Whitmore, parenting is not control. Parenting is not reputation management. Parenting is not teaching your children to fear honesty because your pride cannot survive embarrassment. She stared down at the table. For once, she had no comeback. Then I looked at Lily and Mason. I said, you both did something very difficult today. Telling the truth in a room full of adults takes courage. Mason wiped his eyes with his sleeve. Lily nodded, but she did not look relieved yet. And I understood why. Court can expose the truth, but children still have to go home to the consequences of it. So I made sure the appropriate child welfare contacts and school support services were notified. Not as punishment against the children, but as protection for them. Because when a parent threatens children into lying under oath, the court cannot simply close the file and pretend the danger ends at the courtroom door. Karen finally looked up. For a second, I thought she might apologize. Instead, she said quietly, they humiliated me. That sentence chilled me more than all her shouting, because even at the end, after everything her children had revealed, she still saw herself as the victim. Not them. Herself. That is what made this case unforgettable. A good parent feels pain when their child is afraid. A selfish parent feels insulted when their child is honest. Emily Dawson gathered her documents slowly. Before leaving, she paused near Lily and Mason and said, I'm proud of you. Lily started crying again, but this time the tears were different. They were not trapped tears, they were release. As the courtroom emptied, I sat for a moment longer than usual. Judges are expected to move from one case to the next, but every now and then, a case stays sitting in front of you even after the people leave. This one stayed because Karen Whitmore came into my courtroom believing she could mock authority, bend truth, and use motherhood as a shield. But motherhood is not a shield for manipulation. It is a responsibility. And when her own children finally spoke, they did not destroy their mother. They destroyed the lie she had built around them. That is the lesson I still carry from that day. Children may be small. They may be scared. They may tremble when adults pressure them. But when truth finally comes out of a child's mouth, it can shake an entire courtroom. And on that morning, it did.